Welcome to the Powerline Podcast, the official podcast of GreyStone Power. I'm your host, Emily Young, and today we're talking about GreyStone's involvement at the Georgia Capitol. So, let's get started on episode 54 of the Powerline Podcast. The Georgia House and Senate deliberate on a wide range of legislation each year, including measures that specifically affect electric utilities. Today, we welcome back Blake Doss, the Director of State Government Affairs, to give us the latest scoop. Blake, welcome back to the podcast. Nice to see you again. Can you tell us a little about your role at GreyStone?
It's good to see you too, Emily. Well, I'm the Director of State Government Affairs. I've been in this position for about 3 years now, and it's something that the executive team and the board was very excited to bring on a government affairs role to ensure that our membership, the co-op, are protected from bad policies, bad legislation at the Capitol. So that's where I spend most of my time during session, is at the Capitol, meeting with our legislators, talking about policies that will help us and talking through policies that might hurt us to make sure that those don't get passed.
Sounds great. Can you tell us about some of the legislation that was introduced this year and how it impacts power companies?
So there were a broad range of legislation that was introduced this year. I think there were over 1,200 bills and several more resolutions introduced at the State House this year. And I would say maybe 30, 40 of those probably specifically applied to power companies. Before we jump into those specifically, I think our members would be glad to hear that there were some tax bills passed this year that if you filed your taxes last year and the year before that, you will receive $250 back from the state government if you filed individually, or $500 back if you filed jointly. And so that's always good news that we like to share. Can't take any credit for that, but like to share the news nonetheless. So most of the power bills that we spent time on this year were actually making sure that they didn't get passed. They were bills that we were afraid would harm our membership and harm our way of doing business. So two of those bills, HB 507 and SB 203, they were community solar bills, which they sound great. But what they actually would do would allow unregulated solar companies to sell electricity directly to consumers without having any of the protections in place that co-ops or other power companies have in place to make sure that membership is protected. So that is one thing that we went out to make sure that those bills did not pass and our members would not be harmed. If you remember 2 or 3 years ago, we actually helped get a bill passed to allow members up to 30 business days to get out of bad solar contracts, and we were afraid that these type of bills would see an influx of those type of situations again. So we were happy that those bills did not get a hearing or did not pass either the Senate or the House.
I know you've already mentioned a couple of bills. Do you have any others you'd like to mention and their significance?
So we're going to be looking at a few things. There's a study committee that's going to study franchise fees. So franchise fees are placed on power companies, and those franchise fees get passed to the consumer, and the consumer pays that franchise fee, and then we remit those franchise fees back to the local government that puts it on the power company. So there is a study committee to see if those franchise fees are fair, if any other government should be able to place those franchise fees on power companies. So we'll be following that study committee closely to see what comes out of that. Also, there was a GFA funding bill. So GFA is the state agency that helps finance local governments for water, gas, even some electrical stuff. And they authorized GFA to finance public natural gas infrastructure projects and electrical undergrounding projects. Now, that doesn't mean anything specifically for GreyStone Power, but what it does mean is, say your local development authority in one of our service areas wants to bring power to a business coming into town, they can go and apply for a loan from GFA to pay to have our electrical lines buried so that that business would be more likely to come to our community. So that could be good news in the long term for us, but we'll be watching that closely and seeing what that looks like.
What was some of the legislation that lawmakers passed this session that may affect our members?
So one of the pieces of legislation that we're looking at is the EV tax deadline extension. 2 or 3 years ago, the General Assembly passed a law that places regulation and tax on EV charging stations, much like fuel pumps. And one of the things they did was place a tax even on free chargers and regulation on free chargers or company chargers, which would, of course, affect the free charging that we have for our membership out in front of our headquarters at GreyStone Power. So they passed an extension this year. It was supposed to go into effect this year, and this is the second year they've passed an extension to move it to 2027. And that would give the Department of Agriculture time to figure out how to regulate these things and how to tax these things as well for the Department of Revenue. So that is one of the things that we're happy about. That extension went into place. It gives us all more time to figure out how this affects our free charging stations and how it affects our membership.
Can you tell us a little about the process of everything? For example, I assume the legislature is fast. If I wanted to bring an idea at the beginning of the legislative session, they could have it finalized in a month, right?
Not exactly. The legislative game is really all about friendships. So friendships and allies. Everything you do there, so if you're in the Georgia House, you have to have 90 friends. You have to have 91 votes to get something passed, so 90 friends plus you. In the state Senate, there's 56 senators. So you're always looking for, number one, is my legislation good policy? Number two, how much time and research did I put into it to make sure that the legislation is great? And honestly, in my time at the General Assembly for 7 years and my time in this role for 3 years, perfect is the enemy of great. There is no such thing as a perfect piece of legislation. So making sure you get your bill as close to perfect without holding yourself up, trying to make perfection is important. And then you've got to go through committee hearing process, which can take time. You got to get the votes on the committee. Then you got to get it out of the rules committee, which decides what bills come up for an actual vote. And from there, you get the vote on the floor, where all 180 members of the House or all 56 members of the Senate get to vote. And then you get to start the process all over again in the other body, the Senate or the House. And then you got to make sure the governor doesn't dislike your bill, and you got to make sure that he's not going to veto it and he's actually going to sign it. So there's a lot that goes into the process. Some bills take many years. One of the bills that comes to mind that I worked on when I worked for the Georgia House of Representatives was the original broadband bill. We worked on that bill for 3 months, took the entirety of session. We had a 3-foot stack of drafts under our desk, 3-foot tall stack, and still couldn't get everybody to love it, which probably meant it was a great bill because everybody had something they didn't like about it and everybody had something they did like about it. But it took 3 months to get it passed, and that was a hard thing to do. And it was a big bill. So it's a long process. It's a worthwhile process. It can also be a frustrating process. But at the end of the year, if you accomplish something, it's a really great feeling.
So let's put it into perspective. Why is it significant that GreyStone is involved at the Capitol? Can you give us examples of legislation that we've supported in the past?
So being involved at the Capitol, it's something that our CEO and our executive team was very concerned about, which is why they created this position. It's something the board's been concerned about because the electric industry is changing. For the last 30, 40 years, the electric industry has mostly stayed the same, and then 90s, 2000s, it started to change, and it's going to continue to change. And so policymakers are going to continue to look at ways to affect change in our industry. What we want to do is make sure that the changes don't negatively affect our membership, which is why it's important to have a voice at the Capitol. Legislator wants to do X, we're going to come in and say, well, if you do X, Y is going to happen. It's not necessarily a bad thing. It's not necessarily a good thing, but education is important. These legislators, I know quite a few of them personally. They're all good people. They're all hardworking. They all have good intentions, but they're part-time legislators, which is why they rely on experts such as myself in a government affairs role to come in and give them education on what to do with an energy idea. So that's why it's important to have a voice, is just making sure that our members' voices are heard and that education is given, and then the legislators can do with that information what they will, and we do our best to work with them in whatever regard they decide to go with.
Thanks for all the updates. I know our members appreciate being in the loop. Just for fun, what's been your favorite experience while visiting the Capitol?
Oh, well, like I said, I worked there for 7 years. So for me personally, it's the friendships made with former fellow staff, legislators. It's seeing all my old colleagues. They're just really fun to be around. And frankly, it's the organized chaos at the Capitol and the stress of that environment is a ton of fun. It looks crazy from the outside in, but when you're in it, it is just a great time. If you haven't been to the Capitol and it's not your thing, I mean, you can always go to the 4th floor, see the State Museum, the two-headed cow, the two-headed snake, all that kind of stuff. It's really a great field trip opportunity for you, your family, your kids, all that stuff.
Yeah, I actually had a chance to visit the Capitol back when I was in elementary school, and it was a lot of fun. Okay, so we always ask everybody the same last question. Is there anything else you'd like to tell our members?
Honestly, I would just say that the benefit of working for a co-op, and this is coming from somebody who worked for the state and got to do a lot of good for a lot of people, is that the people at the co-op really care about its membership. You can see that in expanding into the broadband business. Go check out GreyStoneConnect.com. It's important to us to fill the gaps that are there for our membership. So we did that in the 1930s when we started what was our predecessor to bring power to rural membership, and we did that with GreyStone Connect to bring broadband to our unserved and underserved members. And that is our driving mission, is to make life better in our communities, and we hope that means something to our membership. We know it's what drives us every day.
Unfortunately, we're all out of time for today's episode. Make sure to check us out on social media. We're on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and X. And don't forget to subscribe to our podcast, available on our website, Spotify, Apple Podcast, and YouTube. Thanks for joining us for episode 54. We'll catch you next time on the Powerline Podcast.